service, and I get to hear it again. So, and we've just gotten to know each other fairly good here over the past number of months. We've been meeting together and talking about this. So, Shirley, it's all yours.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
I'd like to open in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day that you have given us. Father, I thank you for this church. I thank you for the congregation. And I ask that you bless each and every one of them today. And Lord, as I speak, I ask that I not be judged, and all the praise and all the glory will go to you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. I was born and raised in a Catholic family, and there were 4 of us born in 4 years. I had 2 brothers, and then when I was born, since I could remember, my mother always told me that I was a mistake, and she never wanted me. She only wanted boys. She didn't want any girls. And I always felt left out. I always felt unloved because my mother would always hug my brothers, tell my brothers how much she loved them, and did so many things with them, and did absolutely nothing with me. And that's how my life was for the first several years. And then at age 13, when I was to go to high school, my parents couldn't afford to put all 4 of us in a Catholic high school, so we went to public high school with the understanding every Monday we would go for religious instructions at the Catholic Church. And so that got started in my life, and there was this priest in the Catholic Church that was always making me stay after class, always some excuse that I was talking or something or disrupting the class. So I would sit in the back of the class so I wouldn't be tempted to talk to anyone, and I, paid attention the best I could because it was so boring and I really didn't understand it. And when the priest was alone with me, he would rub his hands on me and say, "Oh, I just like that color you're wearing today. Your blouse is so pretty," and different things like that. And then came one Monday when I had to stay after class, and he raped me. Just exactly 2 miles from the church to where I was living, and I was crying and I was running all the way home, and I couldn't wait to tell my mother what had happened to me. And then I knew that when I told her what happened to me, that she would hug me and tell me she loved me, and we would start a relationship and we would be friends, and everything would be just like it was with my brothers. I can still remember walking in the kitchen door, and my mother was standing there ironing. And I walked up to the ironing board, and I was crying, and I told her what had happened. And I didn't get any hug. She reached out her hand and she slapped me, and then she back slapped me in the face and said, "Shirley, you're a liar. Priests don't do things like that." And it was at that exact moment that the hate and anger started to grow in me. And I was threatened by my mother not to mention it again and not to ever tell my father, and or I would be in really serious trouble. So I kept that in me for years and years. But right from the beginning, I hated my mother. I wouldn't look at her when I had to talk to her. I put my head down or turned sideways. I just did not want to look at my mother anymore. And then I wanted to work, and my father said that as long as I kept up my schoolwork, that I could have an outside job. So at the age 13, I started working and going to school. And my hate continued, my anger continued. I had nowhere to turn. I didn't know what to do about it. And then at age 16, I saved the money that I had been working since 13, and I bought my first motorcycle. And I joined Hell's Angels, because they told me they loved me. All I wanted to hear was someone to say, I love you. But I did a lot of things that were wrong, being involved with Hell's Angels. But that's how my life was at the time. And then my hatred went to God. I started hating God and letting God know that I hated him. And then at the age of 18, was a busy weekend. I graduated from high school. It was my 18th birthday, and I graduated from high school, and I got married all in the same weekend. I didn't get married because I was in love. I didn't know what love was. I got married because it meant I'd never have to see my mother again. I wouldn't have to live in her house, and she certainly wasn't going to be welcome in my house. The first 2 years of marriage wasn't that bad, and then at age 20, I had my first daughter, and 18 months later, I had my second daughter. And then things started falling apart again, and of course, I became angry, and I blamed God again for everything. And every time things went wrong in my life, I would up and move to a different state, because I thought that if I would move somewhere else, that my problems would stay where they were and wouldn't follow me. But after moving to 14 and living in 14 different states, I realized that's not true, that your problems do go with you. But another thing with me, I never liked it because women couldn't hold certain jobs. They were jobs just for men. And I never liked that idea. And I was always out to prove that I could do the same thing any man could do. And so I had a friend who had an 18-wheeler, and he taught me how to drive an 18-wheeler. And so then I purchased my own 18-wheeler with the bank, and I owned it, and I hauled sheetrock and barrel tobacco in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. And I did that for 7 years. And it was a good living, but you were never home that much. And as my two daughters got older, I didn't like the idea of being away from them overnight, even though I had a woman who lived there that took care of my children. But while driving the truck, I did a lot of scary things that, like, one time we were talking on our CBs, I was talking with another trucker, and we got bored, and we were on the highway. We both had a full load, and we were going 70 miles an hour. And so we rolled our windows down, and this trucker, he had a partner. And so as we had our windows down, and we got up alongside each other, and I reached out with one hand and held hands with the guy in the passenger side of his car going down the highway 70 miles an hour with a full load. And I'm here to still tell about it. But it wasn't scary to me then, but now it's scary to even think about what I had done, things like that. And then I had to use tarps on all the time to cover the barrel tobacco and to cover the sheetrock. And tarps are heavy and they're hard to maneuver. And so I conned all the men truck drivers into helping me. And I would promise them different things. I would do this, I would do that, I would meet them here and that, just so that they would help me. But I never lived up to what I said I was going to do. And so then I knew I had to find another job that they don't allow men. I mean, they don't allow women, something just for men. So there was an ad for a manager for a 7-Eleven store. And this was in North Carolina. And so I filled out the application and mailed it in, but I was smart enough just to put my first 2 initials and my last name. So then I got a respond in the mail to come in for an interview, and I went in for the interview, and I had the letter with me, and the man said, "Oh, there must be a mistake. We don't hire women." I said, "Well, you sent this letter to me. This is my name, and I'm here for an interview, and I want an interview." He says, "Well, you have to do things like a manager has to hose down and sweep the parking lot and wash windows and do things like that." I said, "Where is it written that a woman can't do that?" And so then he said, "Well, you have to take a math test." Well, math was my best subject. And he said, "You're going to be timed on this math test." And so I finished the test and I aced it, and I did it all before the time was up. So then he was stuttering and stalling and everything and said, "Well, you have to take a polygraph test." And so I didn't know what a polygraph test was. But I said, "Okay, that's not a problem." And so he told me I had to go the next morning at 10 o'clock to this motel at room number 1. And I got to thinking, why would I have to take a test at a motel? But I thought to myself, I don't care what it is, I'm going to do it because I'm going to get this job. And so the next morning I knocked on the door at room 1 at the hotel, and the door opened, and it was a nice looking guy, and I thought, well, this won't be too bad. And then I looked over at the bed, and there was this big black case on the bed and these wires coming out of it, and I thought, well, at least I'm not going to have sex with him. And then I was wondering, what was going to happen, and so he, started talking about this polygraph test and everything, and he asked if I knew what it was, and I didn't want to act dumb, so I lied and said, "Yes, I know what it is," and so then in our talk he said about lie detector test, and so I knew what a lie detector test was, but I didn't know it was a polygraph, so he asked if I was willing to take it, and I said, "Yeah, sure." So he hooked me up to those wires and everything, and he said he was just going to ask me a few, personal questions, my name and age and general things like that, and then he would go into the questions that he needed to ask. I said, okay. So he did that. He asked my name and age and all that kind of stuff, and then he started asking questions. And I would answer the questions to what I thought he wanted to hear, or what I thought would make myself look good. So the only questions I answered honestly were the beginning ones with my name and everything. And lo and behold, I passed the polygraph test. So I go back to the store again, and said, yeah, I passed the polygraph test, you know, and then the supervisor said, well, you have to, they inventory your store once a month, and if your inventory is $100 or more short, then you'd immediately be fired. And so he gave me the clue to what I have to do. I knew in my mind right then that I was going to have to do something so that my inventory wasn't short. And so I became friends with the vendors who, you know, like the bread vendor, the beer vendor, the pop vendor, all the vendors that come in the store, and they would wheel in their things in the crates, like 10 high. And so I would tell them, leave the first one like it is and the bottom one like it is. But in between all the other ones, if it was pop or beer or something, take out 4 bottles. So that 4 bottles were missing from every case, and those 4 bottles would come to me. And then the same thing with the bread vendor. And so they started doing that for me, and I started doing illegal things for them. And my first inventory was over $1,000 over. And it's because I cheated everyone else. And so they were amazed, you know, and they asked me how I did it. And I just said, oh, I was very careful. I make sure no one's walking out with anything. And I also knew how to rig 3 of the gas pumps. There was like 6 gas pumps, and so I was getting more money in the store that way. And I could talk a great talk, and people would ask me, oh, what's on sale today, Shirley? And I'd say, oh, we have 2 for the price of 3 today. And they'd say, okay. And so I would sell them the 2 items and charge them for 3. And they didn't know any difference. They just paid, you know. And then that was around the time when they first, the little stores like that, convenience stores, started renting out shampooers for carpets. And there was a contest going, and whoever rented the shampooer out more times and was, I think, 3 months or something like that, the contest, the prize was a trip to the Bahamas. So I convinced people to rent you got more points if they took it for a whole weekend too. So I got them to rent it on the weekend, and I got people who didn't even have a carpet in their house to rent it because they thought they were helping me. And, you know, I just had them conned, and lo and behold, I won the contest to go to the Bahamas. And I did, you know, all kind of things like that, and I just thought I was so good, you know, and the other store managers were catching on that I was doing something. So they would come to me and ask me, you know, how to do something, you know, what was I doing? So for $25, I would tell them something they could do at their store. But I told them, you know, they would be in big trouble if they ever told on me. So then they would do that. They would do what I told them, and then they'd want to do something else, so they'd come back, and the price was then $50. You know, I raised the price every time when I told them different things to do. And so that continued, and I was asked to be the supervisor, become a supervisor over 11 7-Eleven stores. And then problems came up in my life again, and I decided it was time to move again. And so I went home and I told my daughters, we're moving, we're getting out of here. And so my one daughter said, well, where are we going to move this time, Mom? And I said, I don't know. I said, go get the atlas, and I'll blindfold you and turn you around, and whatever you point to with the pencil, that's where we'll go. And she was excited. Oh, right, you know. So she did that, and the pencil landed on Rockford, Illinois. Well, I never heard of Rockford, Illinois before, but there was a promise I made to my daughter, and I kept my promise, and we packed up and we moved to Rockford, Illinois. And I told him, I said, now Mom's got to find a job somewhere. And I said there was an ad in the paper where they needed a security worker at a government place. And both my daughters said, well, Mom, you're good with a gun, you can do that. Because I always carried a .38 with me. It was legal then at the time, and I always would keep it on top of my purse and have my purse, behind the counter and everything, so people would see it and they wouldn't mess with me. And so I went there to interview for the job, and the next day I was wearing the uniform and I was, doing the security work. And I told the guy who hired me how I figured out a way that we could do less security for the company, but also make more money. And so we started doing things like that. I mean, it was always a challenge to me to try to cheat somebody. And that's just how my life was. That was the type of life I was living in. And then things continued getting worse for me. And I was married to an alcoholic. I never had a drinking problem because I never drank. I always felt that I needed to have a clear head because I had to be thinking all the time, be one step ahead of everybody, how I was going to cheat them. And so I never got involved with the alcohol. But alcohol can destroy so much. And so I was a prisoner in my own home at the time. Like if we had any male visitors come to visit, I always had to say I wasn't feeling well and excuse myself from the room. Whenever I had to use the bathroom, I had to leave the door open. And I remember one evening I was looking out the kitchen window while my husband was just arguing about something, and a guy was walking by. He had his little dog on a leash, and my husband at the time pushed me away from the window and asked what I was looking at, and I said nothing. And he saw the guy with the dog, and he says, oh, you were signaling to him when you were going to meet him and have sex. I mean, this is what I lived with. And it was so demeaning. And in front of other people, I was the best wife, I was this and I was that, but when we were alone, I was, I don't want to repeat the names that I was called and what I was. And then I also had to go and buy his liquor every day, and I don't know why, but he had told me I had 14 minutes to get to the liquor store and get the purchase and come back. And if I didn't come back within the 14 minutes, then I'd have to sit in the chair in the middle of the kitchen, and he would walk around me and ask me questions. Then he would turn and walk the other way and ask the same questions, trying to trip me up. And things just continued like that, and I would go through red lights, and I would be rude and cut ahead of people in the liquor store and everything just so I wouldn't be late getting back. I tried leaving 2 times and didn't work out. And finally, in my mind, I thought the only way that I could make it was with either he had to go or I had to go. One of us had to die before anything would ever work out. And so, in a matter of 5 seconds, your life can change forever. In 5 seconds, I shot him 5 times. But I was a bad shot, and none of the shots entered a vital area, that just all grazed him. But of course, I got arrested. I was 41 years old at the time, and my freedom was taken away from me. I didn't want to live anymore. I had looked around in the cell block and I saw a way that I could commit suicide, but I'd have to wait until at nighttime when everyone was locked in their cell and there wasn't any security around at the time. During the meantime, I used to rant and rave. Oh, I just cussed terribly, and I would hit the bars, kick the bars, and finally one woman came up to me and said, maybe you should see a chaplain, maybe it would help you. And I asked her what the blankety blank was a chaplain, and she told me, and I didn't know there were anything except priests and nuns, and I hated them. But she said the secret words. She said, you can get out from behind bars and go downstairs into an office. And so I asked the guard I said, I want to see the chaplain. So I was taken down to the chaplain's office, and when I walked in, there was a man sitting behind the desk, and he had this big grin on his face. Well, right away I wanted to slap it off, because why would someone be grinning in jail? Why? And I didn't see anything funny. And he had told the officer that he could leave and he would be all right. And so he had me sit down and he started asking me questions. How old I was, did I work, and, did I have children and things like that. And then he made a mistake. He asked me what I thought about God. And I jumped up off the chair and I started cursing at him, and I took everything on his desk with one clean sweep and it all went to the floor. And I said, don't you know it's God's fault that I'm here? And later he told me I ranted and raved for 45 minutes without taking a breath on how much I hated God and how I blamed everything on God. And then he talked to me some more, and then he handed me a paper and a pencil, not a pen, but a pencil and paper, and said to write down some questions, what I wanted to talk about the next time I see him. And I thought he was nuts, because I said, you want to see me again after what I did? And I cussed a few more times, and then I kicked something on the floor that I had knocked off his desk, and I said, no, I'm not picking this up. And he said, Shirley, nobody asked you to pick it up. And he still had that stupid grin on his face. And so I went up, and he had handed me a Bible and told me, he was giving it to me and I could keep it. And when I was holding the Bible, like a strange feeling went through my body. And I wanted to look in that book and see what it was all about, but I didn't want this grinning fool to know I was interested. So I didn't open it in front of him. I get back up to the cell block, and I told the woman who told me about the chaplain, I told her she could have my garbage tray because I wasn't hungry, and I went in my cell and I sat on the cot and I opened this book because I wanted to see what it was about. And I opened it to the book of Job. Well, J-O-B spelled job to me. And I said, oh, this is about the job this fool has. And I thought, I can read this and I can get a job just like him, only, I could be better at it than him. I wouldn't grin at everybody, And so then after I was reading, I said, man, job is a man. Job isn't a job. And I thought, it says right here, and I'm hitting the Bible, where it says, curse God and die. And I said, why are you allowing God to do all that to you? Make those sores on you and make you suffer like that, and you say you love him. And, I said, what is wrong with you? And I'm just angrily talking to a book. And then I started reading the Gospels, and I read about a man named Jesus Christ. The only Jesus Christ I knew was in cursing. I didn't know there was a man named Jesus Christ, and I started reading these things. And then I'm the type of person that, as when I start a book, I like to go to the last chapter and see how it ends. And if it doesn't have a good ending, then I don't finish reading the book. And I still do that to this day. And it was the book of Revelations. Well, that was exciting to me, and I called it Big Money because all of the things that were happening in that book and everything. And so then I got to Revelations 3:20, where Jesus said he stands at the door and knocks, and anybody who answers, he will come in and have sup with them. I didn't know what that meant at all. But something inside me said that I need to pray. And I thought, why do I need to pray? And then something told me, get on your knees. And so I got on the cement floor on my knees, and I thought, how do you pray to myself? And I started out because I had read about forgiveness in the Bible, and I said that, I forgive everybody that I've ever hurt. And then something in my head said, no, you don't mean that. Don't say that. You know how to get even with someone. And I tried ignoring it, and I said, I forgive all those who have done wrong to me. And again, I had to wrestle. No, you don't mean that. You know how to get even with people. You know what to do about that. But I continued to pray, and I prayed, and I don't know how long I was praying. I just know it was through half the night. And I was crying and sobbing, and when I realized that when I went to get up, I was laid flat out on the cement floor. And I don't know how long I'd been there. And when I got up, the strangest thing happened to me. I felt so different. And I didn't have the pain in my left side anymore. I always had the pain in my left side, and I went to all kind of doctors, and they couldn't find anything wrong with me. Well, it was the anger and the hatred that I was holding in me, and it was growing in me like a cancer. And that was gone. And I told the chaplain about it, and it took that grinning fool 72 hours to convince me I could lie down and go to sleep. And when I woke up, I wouldn't have that pain, because I thought the minute I go to sleep, when I wake up, that pain's going to be back, and I didn't want that pain back. That pain has never come back to me. Never. And then, while I was in jail for about a year before I had my trial, the chaplain would counsel me a couple times a week, and I wasn't any fun to be counseled. I would beat my fist on his desk, or at the table if we were in a different room, and I would just be aggravating. And I was trying to get him to get mad at me so that I could have an argument with him. I'd like to yell at people, I'd like to, and if your voice got loud, I'd like to make mine louder. And, and he didn't raise his voice, and he kept grinning, and I just couldn't understand it. And then came the day of my trial, and I was found guilty, and I was sentenced to 6 years in maximum security in Dwight Prison in Dwight, Illinois. And I can remember, it was 138 miles there, and I can remember all the thoughts that were going on in my mind as we were driving there. And then when we were actually going through the gate, I said, if there really is a Jesus, if there really is a God, and it's a good God and a good Jesus, then you're going to have to prove it to me. You're going to have to stay with me. Jesus stayed with me. When you first go to prison, it's so demeaning. You're stripped down, and you're given the stuff they assume everybody has lice who comes in there, and you have to use it in your hair and on your body and everything, and then you're put in this little cell, and you're the only one there until they can have a doctor examine you to see if you have any diseases or not, and you have to talk to a psychologist and that. It was a wooden door, and there was no glass in it or plastic or anything. You couldn't see. But at mealtime, it would slide open, and you got your food in a brown paper bag. It would be dropped on the floor. And in that food would be coffee or juice or something or soup. And of course, the lids would come off. And and I wasn't used to eating like that, getting my food off the floor. And there were times when I didn't have to pray to God for a day or for a half day, for a couple hours. There were times when I had to pray to God, God, just help me make it through this next 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking God is 5 minutes. Help me, please. Jesus helped me. And then after I got out of that, they moved me to where I was going to stay, and it was a minimum security cell. And I couldn't get over it because I was supposed to be in maximum security. And then a few days later, a guard comes to a cell where I was at and said, you have to come with me, the warden wants to see you. And so I started crying. And I thought, oh no, she's going to find out that they'd placed me in the wrong, place, and that she was going to tell me that she's sorry, but she had to put me in maximum security. And I was just sobbing. And when I walked into her office, she told the guard to leave, and I was sobbing, and she said, did he offend you in any way? Did he hit you or something? And I said, no. She says, well, why are you crying? And I said, because you're going to tell me that you misplaced me and that I need to go to maximum security. And she smiled and she said, no. She said, please sit down. She says, I looked over your work record, and she says, you have an excellent work history. She says, I'm offering you a job running the staff commissary. And that's a job you just don't come into, and that job paid 85 cents a day, which was more than the quarter that the other jobs paid. Well, anyways, she told me about this job, and here I'm the convict. I'm put behind the counter with the cash register, and I was told by her not to let any of the officers come behind the counter and get near the cash register, that I was responsible for it. And here, me the thief is responsible for it. Had I not been a Christian, I could have played real good games. But I did that, and then in the daytime, I worked in the daytime. At nighttime, I went to college. And of course, you couldn't go to college, but the professors came to the prison. And so I got a 4-year college degree, and it made the time go by faster, and I saw all the terrible, horrible things that happen in prison, and I saw how people were hurting. I saw how some people never got a piece of mail, never got a visit, never got anything. And right then, God was placing in my heart that he wanted me to help women like that. Well, the Grinning chaplain, he came and visited me twice a month while I was locked up for the 6 years. And then when it was time for me to be released from prison, he was there to bring me back to Rockford. I didn't want to go back to Rockford, but he told me it was time in my life where I should make roots and I should go back to Rockford and face up to what I've done and to start from there. And so I listened to him and I did that, and I tried to find a job. But when you filled out the paperwork for the job, they'd always ask, do you have a felony? Have you had a felony? And I'd have to put yes, and then they say, what is the felony? And when I put down attempted murder, well, I never got an interview. And I was just so depressed because I knew I wasn't the same person. I knew I was a different person, but how could I convince people otherwise? And then I went to Salvation Army and I talked with the minister there. And after a while, he offered me a job as as a part-time secretary. But he said, I need to ask you one question. And I said, yes. And he said, if I tell you to do something that you don't want to do, are you going to shoot me? I said, no, it's not legal for me to carry a gun anymore. So, anyways, I started out part-time at the Salvation Army, and then they had an opening on the west side for their community center, which is really a rough place, but because of my background and everything, they offered me the job. And so I did that for a while, but I really wasn't at peace. And, there was a nudging in me all the time, and it's like God was saying that you told me you want me to be in control of your life, but every time I tell you to do something you don't want to do or afraid to do, you throw me in the back seat. And that's what I was doing. And then finally I got the courage and I went to my boss and I said, I'm sorry, but I have to leave. I'm going to move to Chicago. I said, God is calling me into the prison ministry. I said, and there isn't one here in Rockford, so I'm going to Chicago because I know there's one there. And he says, slow down. And he said, tell me exactly what it is you want to do. And I had told him. He said, well, I want you to write everything out and make up a program of what you would do. And if Chicago approves it, we could do it here. Well, Chicago approved it. And so I was able to start it in Rockford. And I would be out on the streets at night. It was the best time. I'd be out from midnight probably till 4 or 5 in the morning talking to the prostitutes. I became friends with them. I befriended them. And I was always, getting in trouble by pimps for being on that side of town. I was warned so many times. One time I went into a 7-Eleven store to get a bottle of pop, and one of the pimps walked up to me as I had the door open, and he said, we've warned you about being on this side of town. So I just took the door and I slammed it into his arm, and I walked up to the front of the store. And then as I was with the prostitutes, they would always tell me, if you see us take off running, we're not mad at you or anything. We just see our pimp coming and we have to leave. And so we were talking. It was in the summer because I had both windows down in the Salvation Army van, and we were talking and everything, and all of a sudden they take off. And so then I looked, and at each window there was a big black dude, okay? And they called me a few names, everything but a white woman, and they told me about being on this side of town. Why do you insist on coming on this side of town? And I said, I can be on any part of town I want because I pay taxes. And then the one said, well, it's dangerous to be on this side of town without having a weapon of some sort. And I said, you think I'm stupid? And I reached down between the seat. And as I reached down under the seat, they looked at each other. They took off because they thought, this woman's crazy. She's going to pull a gun on us. And I pulled it up, and it was my Bible. That was my weapon. And so I went, but then I laughed about it. I thought that was really funny. But then I started visiting the prisons, and not just the women's prisons, but men's also. I went to 17 state prisons, 3 death rows, and I drove at least 1,000 miles a week back and forth to the prisons and doing counseling. And when you're sitting there on death row talking to someone, and it's a guy 6 foot something, and he's got the beard and everything, and you're talking to him, and tears are coming down his cheeks when he asked Jesus into his heart. I mean, nothing's more fantastic than to see and feel something like that. And so I was doing that, and then, I knew I would need to do something just for women, and so I convinced Salvation Army that we needed to get a place for women because I always ask the women, how can I help you? I want to help you. What can I do? And the most of a question that come out was, we need a place to stay. We need a safe place. And I said, and I tell them I want to help them, and then I don't because there's nothing I can do about it. And so we started out with a few apartments, and then we were able to get a 24-unit apartment building, and it had 1 and 2 bedroom apartments in it, and Salvation Army furnished the whole place, and so women that came there, they could, if they had minor children, they could have their children with them, and that was a wonderful thing. And then I was mandated, I just about lived in court 5 days a week, and the judge would mandate someone into my custody, and I would have to put them in my program. And if they did everything all right, then their record would be dismissed. If not, we'd have to go before the judge, and they would be sentenced to jail or prison. And it was just so amazing that, and one of my rules were, the first rule is, if you don't have a GED, you must get a GED. And do you know how excited a woman, a man too, would be when they had this paper, Chaplain Shirley, look, I got my GED. And then they'd want to go on to school from there. And so many of the women, some became drug counselors themselves, some became CNAs. They did all different things, and all because of getting a GED. They found out that there was something in them. They could do something and for themselves. That, and they just enjoyed it so much, and it was just so refreshing, to see them grow and to see them grow in Jesus. And then I retired, and at that time, the grinning chaplain was my husband. And I think some of the people would know him because he spoke at this church many times, because he used to live in Hayward before he went to Rockford. And so we retired, and we came here because I thought if I was here that I wouldn't be tempted to go to work anymore, because if I was in Rockford, the first agency that called me, I would say yes and go work for them. And so we went back there, and they honored me by naming the apartment building after me, and it's called Shirley's Place, and it's still working today, and it's still full of women. And that's a God thing. It's nothing I did, it's what God trained me to do. And now, after meeting with Pastor Gary for a few months and everything, I want to help with the House of Hope that we're planning on having here. And I would like to help get that started, and to have these same things happen in Hayward that happened in Rockford. And I thank you all for listening to me, and I leave you with a challenge, which is found in James chapter 1, verse 22. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, Shirley. Well, and this House of Hope that she's talking about, we have a building being offered to us. We got to work out all the details, but the beginning stage here is we're getting our group together, we're getting our chemistry, we're going to get all that, and then we're going to walk through all that. But it's amazing. how God is putting things together, and working in people's hearts, and again, making a difference. And we always talk about revival. Revival begins right in our hearts.
Yes.
And helping others. And that's how we're going to do it. And Ben has got a song here that goes right along with Shirley's testimony here, and I'll let him introduce it.
A lot of you might have heard this song. Gary asked me to learn it, and so I did. It's Casting Crowns. Does anybody hear her? And one of the great things I love about Casting Crowns is that they're a group of pastors, and so all their songs just have a sermon right in them, and this sermon is directed towards the church. It's directed towards us. And so we'll sing for you. She is running 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. And she is trying, but the canyon's ever widening in the depths of her cold heart. So she sets out on another misadventure just to find she's another 2 years older, and she's 3 more steps behind. Does anybody hear her? Can anybody see? Or does anybody even know she's going down today? Under the shadow of our steeple, with all the lost and lonely people, searching for the hope that's tucked away in you and me. Does anybody hear her? Can anybody see? She is yearning for shelter and affection that she never found at home. And she is searching for a hero to ride in and save the day. And in walks her Prince Charming, and he knows just what to say. Momentary lapse of reason, and she gives herself away. Does anybody hear her? Can anybody see? Or does anybody even know she's going down today? Under the shadow of our steeple, with all the lost and lonely people, searching for the hope that's tucked away in you and me. Does anybody hear her? Can anybody see? The judgment looms under every steeple, lofty glances from lofty people, can't see past her scarlet letter, and we've never even met her. The judgment looms under every steeple, with lofty glances from lofty people, can't see past her scarlet letter, and we never even met her. Never even met her. Does anybody hear her? Can anybody see? Or does anybody even know that she's going down today? Under the shadow of our steeple, with all the lost and lonely people, searching for the hope that's tucked away in you and me. Does anybody hear her? Can anybody see? And he is running 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction.
stand.